Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address you all today at the Connecting Locally webinars on social inclusion research. To start with, I would also like to welcome the participants of this webinar, including those from across Ireland and abroad. As Minister of State with responsibility for disability, I am passionate about promoting the inclusion of people with disabilities in society. In recent years, my department has been proud to provide grant funding through the Disability Participation and Awareness Fund to a range of organisations to help remove barriers to community involvement and to support the promotion and implementation of the UNCRPD in communities. In total, 2.5 million was made available to local authorities in 2021, with an additional 3 million in this year's call, which closed on March 31st. It is fantastic to see such great work emerging from this grant, and I want to commend Kildare County Council, the UCD Centre for Disability Studies and CARE for producing the 3 research studies.
Hello everyone. Welcome to today's Connecting Locally webinar. I am Deirdre Murphy, CEO of CARE. Today you will hear about research that we hosted in participation with the UCD Centre for Disability Studies and Kildare County Council. CARE's mission statement includes promoting inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. We provide a range of services to 88 children and 460 adults in counties Kildare, Wicklow and East Offaly here in Ireland. When we got research funding through the Disability Awareness and Participation Fund, the pandemic restrictions were beginning to ease. We were very keen to support action research that would help us to deliver on a very important strategic goal of ours, which is to support people to develop more opportunities for social connections. Developing our strategic plan involved consultation with people that we support. People told us that they felt lonely and that they didn't have the kind of engagement or connections that they wanted. The results of the research you will hear about today shines a light on both barriers and facilitators for people with intellectual disabilities being included as equals in society. Equality is what is intended by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which our service aims to implement. The research findings will be of great benefit to us in CARE. The purpose of this webinar is to share the results of this valuable research with others who want the best possible quality of life for people with intellectual disabilities. May I now introduce you to the core research team. Anne-Marie Potter is a Social Inclusion, Development, Education and Research Officer in CARE. Anne-Marie has worked in frontline services in CARE for 22 years in a range of support roles. She has a keen interest in promoting accessibility and in overcoming the barriers to inclusion in people's everyday lives. Dr. Geraldine Boland is a freelance researcher and adjunct assistant professor with the UCD Centre for Disability Studies. Geraldine worked in a range of leadership positions in frontline disability services for 23 years. In recent years, her research has focused on social inclusion in neighbourhoods for adults with intellectual disabilities. Her interest is in real-world research that improves quality of life. I am delighted that the research team have taken such an interest in these webinars. May I take this opportunity to welcome all our international participants and also all of you who are joining online today from Ireland. I would now like to introduce you to Davy from our Voice for Care group to speak to you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Davy. You are welcome to this webinar. I live in County Wicklow in Ireland. I am a member of Voice for Care. I help mentors to make service better for everyone. I am in a steering group for research that you will learn about today. I lecture from all over the world today. Thank you for coming along. We hope that you will learn from our research.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Ali, for guiding us through that introduction. It's fascinating to hear where people who share an interest in social inclusion are from. I'm Geraldine Boland, and I'll be your facilitator during today's webinar. And first, I want to introduce you to our panel. You've already met Ali Warner, who's our IT coordinator and fantastic host. And over the next 2 hours, we'll have two presentations. The first is about our study, which for shorthand we call Map My Area. I'll be presenting that. Our second presentation is called Volunteering and Leisure, and want to say hello now to Anne-Marie Potter, who Deirdre mentioned is the Social Inclusion Officer for that service organisation CARE, who have hosted this research. Welcome, Anne-Marie. The next person to welcome is Jeff, who's also involved in the second presentation. And Jeff, you helped us to make a video about your experience as a volunteer. The person in the background there is Debbie. That's Jeff's communication partner. Hi, Jeff. Hi there, Debbie. Then on your screen, you'll also see Eileen Dupuer. Eileen is helping us today to keep track of any questions that you wish to ask as we go along. Eileen is a PhD candidate at the UCD Centre for Disability Studies. Eileen, thanks for helping us out today.
Hello, everyone.
Now, you'll be seeing Eileen and I during the first part of the webinar, and then Anne-Marie and Jeff will be coming back later on in the second half. So now, let's move on to the first presentation on people's experiences of their neighbourhoods. This presentation is pre-recorded and it's in two halves. Ali will show you the first half now, and watch out for the slide towards the end that's on transport. And then just after that, Eileen and I will be back to you again live with a short exercise. Hi, I'm Geraldine Boland from the UCD Centre for Disability Studies. Today I'm going to talk to you about a research study that was designed by Professor Suzanne Gearan and I, focused on the social inclusion of adults with intellectual disability. Why is social inclusion important in the lives of adults with intellectual disability? Well, individuals have small social networks that shrink as people get older. Many adults with high support needs have very few connections outside of family, other people with disability, and paid staff. For the general population, there's a body of research that tells us that having social connections, acquaintances, and friendships, it's good for our health and our happiness. For People with intellectual disability, all quality of life measures include having social connections as a key indicator. The international research on public attitudes tells us that many people with intellectual disability experience barriers to being included as equals in society. Our research question included finding out how individuals experience connecting with people where they live. This study focused on people living in Irish towns and in rural areas served by CARE, a service provider with a range of services for children and adults with intellectual disability in counties Kildare, County Kildare is the one highlighted in light green here on the map. CARE also provides services in the 2 nearby counties that I've named here on in the slide. So first, what do we mean by social inclusion? It's called many different things, but Suzanne and I have completed 3 studies on this already since 2019, and we published a definition. Now, there's too many words on the screen here, but we can offer this definition to you after the presentation if you wish. But put simply, social inclusion at the level of neighbourhood means connecting with people and places that matter to an individual locally. It includes the opportunity for this to change over time with new experiences. And I'll be going into the 11 aspects of social inclusion in our definition later on through the slides. So what did we do? What was our methodology? In research terms, this was a multiple case study, but we advertised it using a 4-minute video advert shown to anyone over the age of 21 years receiving services from CARE. Then for a month, each individual who consented to take part, they were supported by a staff member to take photos of the places and the people that matter to them where they live. Then I met the person for a qualitative interview, and usually people chose to have their key worker present. The photos were used as conversation prompts and helped people to show as well as talk about their neighbourhoods. Then for the second interview, we walked around the person's neighbourhood. Sometimes we drove a little, and staff were super helpful with lifts and practical help. The walking interviews worked really well. The person could show, walk past and talk about what mattered to them locally. And often there were spontaneous things that happened while we were walking around, like bumping into people that they knew. And that really showed people's experience of where they live. So who took part? Well, 6 women and 4 men took part in this study. And while we were open to all adults, 8 people who chose to take part were aged between 44 and 52. So we had a couple of people in their 20s, but as you can see, the average age here was 42. Now, that doesn't represent all age groups, but these were the people who came forward. I want to give you the headlines now on the type of support people needed in their daily lives. 4 people had Down syndrome, 3 people had intellectual disability and autism, and 1 person had epilepsy. While no wheelchair users came forward for this study, 2 had mobility challenges and didn't walk long distances. And just in summary, all 10 had support needs with varying levels of intensity. And research, tells us that sometimes people move suddenly from their familiar neighborhood following the death of a parent. And 4 people that I met had sadly lost a parent in the 3 years beforehand. Then, while 2 people lived in staffed group homes, 8 people lived with family, And there were different types of family structures, but 2 people were supported fully by adult siblings now that parents had passed away. And 3 people were living with widowed mothers. Now, what were the neighbourhood types? Well, just to repeat, this was rural and town areas in Ireland, no city here. And half lived in towns of different sizes, and the other half lived in rural village or rural roads. Now, what do I mean by rural road? I mean a detached house on its own plot, usually at a distance from the nearest village or town. Now I want to go through the 11 aspects of social inclusion as they apply to the 10 individuals that I met. The first aspect is becoming known to see or by name where you live. And this was strong for 7 people. All bar 1 was known by their family membership where they lived. Now, social inclusion involves accessing some personal business and health services locally. And this was strong for the people that I met. The quote there is from a person who said, "This is my local post office. I collect my money here every Wednesday. The lady is Brenda. She's a lovely lady. We have a lovely chat." So you can see it was both place and the person was important there. All 10 people did some shopping locally, some more than others. The most popular shop was, you know, the local convenience food shop, where the small food shop that we go to stock up essentials, you know, snacks and food. This was the most popular shop, but other shops as well featured. Now, having a sense of connection with place, this is an important part of social inclusion. And this was fully present for the 10 people that I met. Now, these are Google images, but they're very similar to photos that people took of local landmarks or beauty spots. People were really proud of their town and noticed these landmarks, you know, as we were walking around. And I think you know, these were important to people as locally. Some people were from farming backgrounds. The family farm was important, even if the individual didn't work on the family farm. One person owned a dog, and the dog came on the walking interview with us. In common with studies in Australia by Gould and colleagues, walking a dog is a connector in terms of friendly exchanges with strangers and other dog owners whom you come to know. Many people talked about places locally that hold important memories for them. Family graveyards, for example, can be seen in from this quote that's here. "My church was frequently mentioned, even by those who didn't attend regularly. Some people showed me the seat that they sit in every Sunday, and 2 people now live nearby their old family home. And even though they don't live in the family home anymore, they live nearby, 2 people still like to visit or pass by." Now, social inclusion involves, you know, individuals getting involved in local leisure. And the most popular among the group of 10 were restaurants, favorite coffee shops and bars. And these were individual engagement in mainstream leisure. Having family and friends, that's an important aspect of social inclusion. And if they live locally, that's a great bonus. All bar 1 had connections with family, and 2 people did not have any friends, unfortunately. But for others who had friends, getting to see them as often as they might like actually was a challenge. And for some, it was lack of transport. For others, it was lack of support. They didn't have somebody to accompany them if they needed that. Meeting up one-to-one with friends was difficult, especially at weekends or evening time. And when the care service was closed during 5 weeks each year, these are spread out closures during the year, that it was problematic in terms of people meeting with friends one-to-one. That was certainly a challenge. If you didn't have someone to accompany you and indeed transport or a lift, you stayed at home. Being connected to people then who are not family or paid staff, that was present for 6 people. And the 3 people who didn't have connections outside of paid staff and family, they had both intellectual disability and autism. As we know, having a valued social role, that's really important to social inclusion. We know that from practice. And being a member of local organisations, that was present for 5 people. The most common role was churchgoer, which for most was a relatively passive role. 1 person was a member of a gym, 2 people were members of men's sheds or women's sheds. An important social role is, of course, my job, but there were mixed results on employment for the 10 people that I met. 5 people had jobs ranging from 2 hours to 9 hours per week. 2 people could walk to their job in the town that they lived in. This was a big bonus if you could walk there. The type of job was very important. 2 people worked in busy local supermarkets, those small, shops that I mentioned earlier. These shops tend to have very high footfall. And, these 2 individuals were already known by family membership, and then the job extended that. So now the person was making connections in their own right outside of family. 1 person worked largely in an empty building, supported by staff as a job coach. So there were no opportunity for connections for that person. Then overall, none of the 5 with jobs had social connections with workmates outside of where they worked. For someone, it was a long-standing job and friendly work colleagues had moved on and regrettably hadn't kept up connections. None of the 10 people that I met were involved in mainstream education courses. Then, having the choice to engage in volunteer work, that was not present for 9 people that I met. 1 person had lost their volunteer role due to COVID restrictions. Then knowing what's happening in your area, that's important for social inclusion, but unfortunately it wasn't strong for this sample. Some people had small amounts of knowledge, but most people didn't really have the knowledge or the support to discover what was happening that they might link into as an individual. Then finally, a critical part of social inclusion is having flexible transport. And thankfully, 5 people in this sample didn't have they had enough transport, and for others it was partially present. The main types of transport were family lifts or service provider transport. And for this particular sample, public transport wasn't something that they used unless they were accompanied. So 1 person used it frequently, but the remainder, it was quite infrequent. Hello again. Now, we've covered how people experience different aspects of social inclusion in their neighbourhoods. But now what we want to do is ask you to reflect on your experience and have some dialogue there. So take a moment to think about these questions. Ali, I think, is going to post the questions now for you. The first is, how do you get to know new people where you live? Where do you go? What do you do? Maybe you might put your answers into the chat box there, and Eileen will take a look at those. Now, we notice that some people are joining us in small groups today, so you might like to take a moment now just to discuss that between yourselves and to post an answer in the chat box. Now, some people we know, they may not wish to get to know people. That's okay. But if you got to know new people in the past, how did you do it? So maybe again, if you just give a couple of a minute or so for you just to put your answers there in the chat box. And Eileen, I wonder, would you like to come in now and just maybe read out some of the replies that people have there? Be grateful of that.
Yes, no problem, Geraldine. Gosh, they're coming in hot and heavy. The library is an interesting one there, because that seems to be a place that some people use to join a range of clubs and activities and events. And a lot of people going to cafes, pubs, shops. Dogs are mentioned, as you said, having a dog to walk, joining clubs really for whatever activity you're interested in, or classes. And then some people said friends of friends, so meeting somebody through a contact. GAA, work. At the school gate is another place if you have family members and you're involved in their lives, or at the park, the play park. So yeah, those are some of the ones coming up. Community centres and classes, GAA again.
That's super. That's super. Out walking, I see, is coming up there on the bus. I see somebody there is volunteering as part of St. Vincent de Paul, and volunteering certainly in making a contribution, working for free. That certainly is a great way of meeting new people who have similar interests to you.
Somebody mentioned using rail there, and that's interesting, isn't it? Using public transport as a way of getting to know other people who use those routes. That can happen, can't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's
and online activities as well.
Yeah, I think these online groups that for many people, including people that I met, online was an absolute lifeline in terms of staying connected with people, family, friends, people that you couldn't see during the pandemic. That was that really important. And other ways of connecting with people are texting, and some of the people I met really enjoy just texting their friends from home, and that's a good way to stay in touch as well. This research, though, looked at people's connections with places and people locally, and I see there's loads. Somebody there is involved in local courses and an advocacy group. An advocacy group is an excellent way to meet people who you probably are going to have a lot in common with, because they're interested in bringing about changes for all people with disability. Any other ones, Eileen?
Somebody mentioned a specific friendship program. Maybe that's something you know about, Geraldine. I wouldn't be familiar.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them in the past. The people that have friendship schemes where they got introduced to somebody new, and that new person actually helped them to meet more people. I know in care they had a buddy scheme some years ago that was very, very effective. Yeah.
Gyms coming up a lot. I suppose that's another place where these classes and activities take place.
Yeah. These are really
group.
knitting group, ICA, I see there.
Yeah.
And I think just important to say that there's a very good Australian researcher called Professor Christine Bigby, and she and colleagues have done a lot of work on what they call, how do you promote encounter? Now, what they mean, one of the types of encounter is friendly exchanges. And we can't have friendly exchanges unless we're out and about. Okay, and so all of those things, like I see somebody there's learning a new hobby online or accessing local classes in your area. Just being physically present is the first step. Second is friendly exchanges with people that you don't know yet. And if we consider what Christine Bigby says is, if we think about the people in our lives who are our friends now, and they're outside of our family, we met them somehow through a first friendly exchange. So all of those things about, walking your dog locally, going out, joining a group, testing things out, trying things out and seeing what you like, what you don't like, that's really key to meeting new people where you live.
Geraldine, I just throw out two things I just noticed there skimming past.
Yeah.
We didn't mention church, I think, for some people is a very important place
Oh, good.
to
Yeah.
meet others. And and choir, that one's close to my heart because that's what I do.
Yes.
And allotments. And then the other one is just somebody saying as well that they don't, I suppose, just important to acknowledge that we don't all necessarily want to always be out, or maybe we don't have the opportunities. I'm not sure which it was in that case, but just that it's not a reality for everybody. So,
Well, that's the reason for the webinar,
Yeah.
is that it is not a reality for everybody. And, you know, the research tells us that the more support you need in your life, from paid staff and from your family, you know, you need more support in terms of developing engagements outside of what we call the bubble of family, staff and other people with disabilities. So yes, for the reality for some people is that they find it hard to make connections. Yeah. I see somebody there goes to the pub, terrific, and local festivals in Headford, and matches, cinema, etc. Okay, so these are all terrific examples. I really like the allotments example as well, because that's a practical activity, practical task, and those practical social roles really, really work well.
And Special Olympics as well. Just
Special
there.
Olympics,
Yeah.
Great way of connecting with new people. Okay, so so now that was really, really fascinating. I could stay on that all day because I'm passionate about this topic, but we need to move on now to the second half of the presentation on people's experiences of their neighbourhoods on that first study. Now, I'm delighted to see people you know, using the chat, and I'd like you to remember now, you know, keep posting any questions that you have as you're listening. And after this next section of pre-recorded presentation, we'll have a short Q&A time so that we can answer any questions that you have. Okay, so back over to Ali now, who'll play the next section of this presentation. Thank you, everybody. I'll now look at the implications for practice from this study by summarising what facilitates social inclusion for adults with intellectual disabilities. And I'll be identifying as well some of the barriers. I'll draw on the international literature, other studies we've done in Ireland, as well as hearing more about the experiences of the 10 people that we met. All the neighbourhoods in this study were identified as safe by the people who live in them. And towns had more rich opportunities to participate. A big bonus for independence were shops and services that were walkable from home. Also, towns that had good outdoor social spaces where local people tend to meet and greet and chat, that was important. Now, neighbourhood barriers, these included maybe rural villages that, you know, have limited leisure, volunteering or work opportunities. The house style, that was also a factor. And rural houses like the first picture you see here, are ones maybe they were on the edge of town. They were more likely to be detached and gated. And the person with disability only leaves home if transport is available, because these roads are not that safe. There's a lot of traffic on them. The Google image below is of a family home in a small town. This is a very similar picture to the road where one of the participants lived. And on this type of street in a small town, the person whom I met knows all their neighbours and engages with them regularly, just coming back and forth to home. So let's look now at Patrick's rural neighbourhood. This is a map, and to protect Patrick's or the person's privacy, Patrick's not the real name, and in fact it's 2 stories, people that I met with similar experiences amalgamated. So look for his home in blue in the circle at the top of the map, and Patrick is 44. He lives with a sibling and their family in a detached house on a rural road. It's 4 kilometres from the nearest small village. Both his parents are deceased, and Patrick needs to have a carer with him at all times when he's away from his home, and he needs lifts from family or from care, his service provider. The circle in this map is important as that shows Patrick's immediate neighbourhood, which includes 2 villages. Then his wider locality, that's spread between 2 towns. And the coloured boxes show the shops and the services that he uses in his villages and in those 2 towns. Now, there's an awful lot more in those towns, but what I've represented here is what he uses currently and what's important to him. He's known by family membership in that circle, in that immediate neighbourhood. But other than church services, he's very little opportunity to actually talk to people outside of his family. And if you look for these pink smiley faces, you'll see where he is known by name and where he's greeted. Now, Patrick has a strong sense of belonging with family, and after 44 years has a strong sense of connection to his home place. So in contrast then, let's take a look at Maria's map. And here we see a very different experience. Maria's 48, lives with her mother on the edge of a small rural town. And again, this is 2 people put together with similar experiences. And Maria's home, if you look for it, it's in the bottom left-hand corner. And everything that is important to her in the town is walkable. She can walk there. Her part-time job is in a busy garage food and snacks shop. And as you can see from the number of pink smiley faces, Maria is very well known by name and to see. She's a lot of acquaintances, and she has a strong sense of belonging in this town. And her story teaches us really the importance of walking around your neighbourhood regularly and how that contributes to social inclusion. And in her case, a job that involves meeting a lot of people. The shop she works in is very busy, and it's only really used by local people. In our study, it's very clear that some families were strong facilitators of social inclusion, and the key contribution is making sure that the person continued to live in their home area. 7 people were living in the area since childhood, and after parents died or were no longer available to offer care, 3 were supported to continue living in the locality that they grew up in. 9 had adult siblings who supported practically, and there were 3 instances that we found of some family imposed restrictions to independence. Now, in this slide, I want to cover individual challenges that can be a challenge to connecting locally. And this is well known from research across the globe. This is not just about the 10 people that I met. Some people are dependent on a carer to go out, so obviously that can restrict your choices if you haven't enough people available. Some people were dependent then in the following way. Maybe they had fears and they were afraid of going out, or afraid, you know, maybe of animals, maybe new experiences, etc. And other people really dislike cold or wet weather, and you know, we get a lot of rain in Ireland. So you know, if you don't want to put on your rain jacket and don't want to go out, that can restrict you. So 4 people then had lost their parents, as I mentioned earlier, and some people, they were still grieving and understandably had withdrawn a little. For others then, there were behaviours of concern and health issues. They were a challenge to connecting locally for some. And one person with autism and intellectual disabilities, they didn't want to engage outside their family and trusted staff. And then 2 others with intellectual disability and autism, interestingly, were keen to engage, and they liked new experiences. Some people then preferred TV and screen time and home-based leisure. Some people then use social media on a positive note. They use social media to actually keep in touch with family, family abroad maybe, or family living in different parts of the country. And Facebook was mentioned, Zoom was mentioned, and then one or two people actually texted their friends and stayed in touch that way. So some people's then physical appearance, that was a challenge to connecting local people, maybe engaging with them. They were happy to be out and about, but local people perhaps kept their distance. And what was noticeable in the walking interviews was, you know, poor public acceptance of staring, etc. Public acceptance of people with disability who had a visual difference of some kind. And we recommend, of course, that this be challenged through ongoing ability awareness education. Then some people with disability, you know, perhaps they had problem remembering people's names, or, you know, maybe one or two people had behaviors that were perceived by neighbors as childlike. But it's also true that many of the individuals that I met had made their own connections, and they were the drivers of their own social inclusion, as well as the support and helpful guidance that they had received from family and staff. A big factor in this was length of time. I mentioned that 8 people were between 44 and 52, so 52 years. So if people still lived in the town that they grew up in, or if they were in a rural area, they still lived broadly in that locality, maybe they walked regularly in the town, they had social skills, well, then they made more connections, like Maria's experience. And of course, people who are willing to try new things, they had an advantage. And people who had friends, not everyone had, but for those who had friends and wanted to meet up with them one-to-one, they had an advantage too. Then public acceptance. Well, friendly neighbours were definitely facilitators, as were helpful retail and services staff. And the walking interviews also showed some examples of local people, unfortunately, being a bit impatient and some distancing, maybe when local, especially if local people didn't understand what the person was saying. One individual walks regularly around their town, but unfortunately, local people tend to cross the street and avoid that person. And again, you know, ability awareness education, particularly focused on people with intellectual disability and autism. We find that, you know, we suggest that as being really quite important for service providers to consider. And there may be opportunities to link up with national advocacy campaigns, like, you know, some of the advocacy campaigns on autism here in Ireland, which have been very strong. Also, we recommend including public education on people with visual differences. Now, research tells us, and this study endorsed that an individualized service model, this is the one that best supports social inclusion, not a group model. So staff had actively supported individual social roles like the ones I mentioned earlier. And this is a powerful facilitator. Then location of services, care local services and group homes are well located in central locations in towns. Certainly all the ones I visited were well positioned to support people to engage and walk and be nearby to facilities. And these are hubs then that people can walk to for shopping or for leisure, etc. An important facilitator then is skilled staff who are committed to overcoming barriers. I met some very determined people willing, you know, to really be determined to overcome barriers. That's very important as a facilitator. Then internationally, staff and service models are equally identified as barriers to making local connections. So staff need to learn the skill of maybe introducing people and stepping back so that locals can talk to the person and not to them, not to the staff member. A second barrier is staff-led, you know, group leisure as the main focus on how staff time is used. A second barrier, so yeah, one service leader that we surveyed actually back in 2019, they said that, you know, each individual needs to be presented in their own right, rather than a strong association with the service provider. Finally, lack of staff and limited transport to support people to meet up one-to-one with friends at weekends, that was a problem. And this is also a barrier when daytime services are closed for 5 weeks, you know, and these closures are spread throughout the year, and long bank holiday weekends, or, you know, again, these, you know, are times when often people spend time sitting at home. So moving on then, I want to summarize then some recommendations for practice. And we recommend staff education on people building acquaintances and fostering those friendly exchanges, or what Christine Bigby calls encounter, fostering those locally. So knowing when to step in, step back. And I'm glad to say there's a free online course that has already been developed by Professor Bigby and her colleagues in Melbourne, Australia. And you know, people around the globe can draw on that course. Also, we recommend service leaders training on creating and supporting a wider range of social roles and maintaining those roles over time. Then we recommend a menu of courses for service users, including building confidence. What's involved in being a volunteer? What's in it for me? What do I get out of it that's helpful to my health and well-being? And social skills training, and indeed total communication supports for some individuals. Then we recommend also courses for siblings. So this sample included people who had siblings who were actively involved in their lives. And a previous study that we did on Irish adult siblings showed that they often feel on the margins of service providers' communications, and some adult siblings, they want more education on social inclusion. The advantage that many siblings have is that they already perhaps have strong local networks, especially if they live in or near the area, and partnered with the work then of frontline staff. You know, this, in the case of some people we met, was already making a powerful difference, and it's something we can build on. Now, of course, important to be said that not everybody wants their brothers and sisters involved in their lives, and sibling involvement would have to be on the basis of being invited by the person with disability to support. So final policy recommendation is to support aging in place wherever possible. Given the strong attachments to place that we found in this study, continuing to live in the neighbourhood where I have strong connections, that's desirable. We know that social networks shrink as people get older, so the aim would be to preserve what people have already. And then on the issue of grieving, and many adults with intellectual disability are at higher risk of complicated grief. And a risk factor is the additional losses. And what we would like to achieve is to avoid a situation with future planning where people experience the triple loss. You know, that they lose the parent, lose home, and lose their social network, and this connection with place, which is very important to people. So these are some references for those who are interested in following up on further research and other research internationally. And finally, a couple of people to thank. I won't go through everybody, but in particular, the 10 people who took the time to share their life experiences with me. I'm most grateful to them. And the care staff and service leaders who really supported people to take their photographs and to talk about where they live. Thanks also to Anne-Marie and to Brian, Katie, Paula, Deirdre and Louise from CARE, who were extremely supportive to this research study. thank you too for your interest in this topic. Okay, so I'm now happy to answer any questions that you have. And I'm wondering if we go over to you, Eileen, are there any questions or comments coming up in the chat box there?
Activity just started in a room next door, so apologies if you can hear some breakthrough sound, but can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so having a look in the chat box, there was a lot of interest in the lovely maps and how they were made, and somebody did answer that to say it was Adobe Illustrator,
Yeah.
but that also Google Maps can be useful. So I just wondered if you've any further advice on for anybody who wanted to make maps like that with people.
Yes, I mean, I think the first thing is making the map using the Adobe is certainly something that's very valuable. I think the maps, if you were to do something similar, which is, you know, that people were to go out and take photos of the places and the people that matter to them. Now, obviously, taking photos of people, you need to ask for permission, but that's fine. So it starts really with the photographs. And we left a month for people to take their photographs and to actually have time for people to discover, you know, or to identify what was important to them. And then later on, I could see that you could actually just also draw out, hand draw a map, and that hand drawn map, you know, could be something that you would actually include in person-centered planning or whatever type of individualized planning that you're involved with, and link it to people's personal goals. So that's what I would suggest on maps. If you want to then go and put it into Adobe, or I see in the chat somebody else mentioned that it can be done on Google Maps, that would be a real bonus. Any other questions?
Yes, they're coming in now, so I'm just trying to a little distracted looking at them coming in. They're great questions. Transport, you mentioned yourself, and some people were wondering if that came up much. So you mentioned the rural lack of transport. I think that could be an issue. So that was mirrored. Also, just people wondering if that physical accessibility of transport came up, and the whole area really, how important that seemed to people.
I'm going to suggest, Eileen, that we come back to the issue or the barrier that is transport, because it's a very complicated problem, to be honest. We come back to that at the end of the second presentation, because I think Anne-Marie and possibly Jeff as well may have things to say about that. So transport, it's not only a challenge for rural Ireland, it's an international challenge. We'll come back to it later.
Okay, just a few other comments to pass on. People welcoming the focus on the role of siblings, that's sometimes neglected. The point made that the lack of day services can be a huge barrier. Somebody asking how you selected participants. I think you said it was advertised and
participants selected themselves. So we focused on the over 35s, and from any part of the 3 counties served by CARE, and people watched the accessible video, which I'd highly recommend as a way to advertise the study. People really want to receive their information more in accessible video format. And then people said if it was for them, they came forward and put their names forward. Then we did a consent process where people took a little bit of time to think, was this for them? And if they decided it was for them, then they started in the study.
Somebody as well, thank you for that, Geraldine. A couple of people actually linking this issue with the time of transition in people's lives when they're moving from school to adult life, and asking if there's anything we feel that should be done more proactively at that point by like the disability teams or anybody else to kind of stop people falling through the cracks kind of at that point.
Yes, I think Eileen, if you would like to comment on this as well, I might take this moment to mention that Eileen's research, PhD research, is focusing on the transition experiences of adults or people with young people from adolescence to adulthood and the transition experiences. So Eileen, do you have any comment on that yourself at the moment?
Well, just that despite the fact that we've done lots of research on the area of transition and what we should be doing to help people, it's still acknowledged internationally that there's lots of issues for people, and that yes, that's a crucial time. If you don't get an opportunity to pursue your goals and get on the road you want into adult life, that it has a huge impact on people, and it can have a lasting input on people. So I suppose there are new research projects going on at the moment in the country, and new pilots being done through the school system to look at how to better prepare people and work with people and find out what they'd like for adult life. So there are some green shoots, I think, in the area of transition in Ireland anyway, and also in lots of other countries. So that's another space that people can look into if they're interested. I'll put up my email as well if anybody wants to continue a conversation about that. I don't want to monopolize today. But thanks for that. Sorry, Geraldine, just staff-led groups versus one-to-one. And I suppose most people saying yes, they think that too, that one-to-one is much better. But I'm just wondering, what do you do if you have a lot of friends who also have disabilities, and you made those friendships through service and you want to keep in touch? Does that mean you should never go out as a group? Like, what is there a tension there between one-to-one and maybe maybe you do want to meet in a group of other people with disabilities as well? And
I think people's friendships with each other who also share the experience of having a disability, those are golden friendships. And these are friendships if what the question is, what is it that people choose? And if people choose their own friends and they want to go out in a group, this is terrific, and that's to be supported, of course. The focus of our research was, and the findings suggest that if you want to make new connections, then you need to move outside of that bubble, which is family, staff, and other people with disability. And so the recommendations are on continually refreshing your connections and making new connections, particularly close to where you live.
Thank you for that. And just to say then as well, people asking if there's any training for service users or resources that could be used to help person-centred planning that has a social inclusion focus.
Excellent. Well, we're going to close out on this question and answer session now, but I actually have developed a website called that's related to these webinars. And what I will do is at the end of the webinar, I'll put in the chat a link to that website, and there are loads of resources available, and we have some other websites which we can suggest that you would link into. So I think, Eileen, we need to close out there, and back to Ali now, because we're going to move on to the next presentation. And I'm really excited to show you Anne-Marie and Jeff's presentation on volunteering and leisure. Again, this will be in 3 parts. So the first part, then the video, and then second half of the presentation is after Jeff's video. So stay with us until the second half of the presentation, and we'll all be back later then for a final question and answer session. So keep posting your questions if you wish, and particularly the ones now on volunteering and leisure. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Potter, the Social Inclusion Officer in Care. Today, Geraldine and I are going to talk to you about a research study on supporting people to make new acquaintances in their local area through becoming a volunteer or joining a leisure club. We will tell you about our early results as our project's still in its final stages. These were our research questions. We already know from research and practice that being involved in volunteering and leisure supports individuals with disability to make connections locally. What was different about this study was that before the person started in their new leisure club or volunteer role, we looked for a club member to become their mentor. We wanted to test out creating natural supports right from the beginning. We included elements from a research study in Australia by Wilson and colleagues, that they had already tested this approach and found that it worked, but we didn't know if it would work in Ireland. So what did we do? What was our methodology? First, we advertised for individuals with disability to take part. We used an accessible video, and we also used easy to read adverts. We were looking for people served by CARE over 35 years old. CARE already has a well-developed supported employment service. The focus of our study was on people who are retired or who are choosing not to work at present. We wanted to support new social roles as close as possible to where you live, to see if people could build new acquaintances. Our time frame was tight, and we advertised 2 research projects together. Afterwards, we said that wasn't a good idea and may have caused confusion. So if you intend to do something similar, make sure it doesn't clash with anything else. How did we make suitable matches? Well, first I met with each person and found out what their personal goals were. I searched their local area based on what they said they'd like to do, and I approached club leaders and talked about the idea. I asked them to identify a club member to act as a mentor for 4 months. Why did we pick 4 months? We wanted to see if we wanted the person to have enough experience to see if it was for them, and the mentor too. We wanted enough time before Geraldine met them both for research interviews about the experience. CARE's volunteer policy includes Garda vetting, so we asked each potential member to complete this step. The next stage was ability awareness training. After each mentor had consented to take part in research, I asked them to watch a video on social inclusion, which was made in Australia. This video showed how Dee Holmes has over time developed a sense of belonging through making connections with people in her neighbourhood. After watching the video, I met each mentor one-to-one. And on the slide here, you can see the topics that I covered. My approach was informal and relaxed because I wanted the mentor to ask lots of questions and feel comfortable to raise any concerns that they might have. These were our results. 6 matches were made. 1 person was in a volunteer role and 5 joined leisure clubs. So you can see from the type of clubs here. Our goal was to make opportunities for people ranging from retirement social groups to a dance fitness class. And we aimed to keep it local. This worked. 3 clubs are within 3 kilometres of home, and 3 people who live in rural areas now take part in a club in their wider locality, which is 8 to 12 kilometres from their home. So who took part? 4 women and 2 men aged between 40 and 68 were successfully matched, average age being 51. 2 people lived in large town and 4 in rural villages. All 6 had daily support needs with various levels of intensity. Support was provided by staff or family members or a combination of both. 4 people were living with family members and 2 in group homes. None used public transport unaccompanied. So how did we seek out suitable matches? Well, it was challenging and we learned a lot through the process. So here are a few do's and don'ts, starting with the positives. First, a valued social role best focuses on a shared practical activity. Socializing that's just about conversation will be difficult for some people. We put a big emphasis on finding matches as close to home as possible, and the age match is important too. Explaining the process to everyone involved and how it's different to what we've tried before. Exploring options takes longer than you think. I made the request directly to club leaders where possible. So under the don'ts, don't presume that the mentors understand disability and have experience. 4 out of 6 of our mentors had some kind of knowledge based on life experience. It's important not to undersell or oversell the support the new person joining the club might need. And finally, if there are challenges, don't give up. Instead, focus on finding solutions. Managing introductions is important. I facilitated all the introductions, having done a lot of practical planning in the background. I prepared the mentor by setting their expectations and also asking staff to help prepare the individual joining the club. some of who were really nervous about the new experience. Introductions also involved me stepping back and leaving it open for the person to create their own space within the club or volunteer role. What have we learned about the characteristics of a good mentor? Well, it's important that they have shared values about social inclusion. Their positivity is important. For example, day one for one person involved going for a walk with their club. The person loves walking but was nervous. The mentor carried the day by saying very enthusiastically, "Come on, let's go." And the nerves were forgotten. So a mentor that appears confident and knows their role well will be reassuring. Another good example of this was on a first day in another new club, and the person was shown how to set up for the activity. So once he knew what to do, he never had that awkward period of hanging around at the beginning of each class, relying on small talk. Each week he could come in and help with the setup, just like everybody else there. Mentors take care to make the person's experience positive, and a good mentor is sociable and makes introductions to others. 4 of our mentors are women and 2 are men, and all bar 1 live in the same county as the person they were matched with. In 3 cases, the club leader chose to be the mentor. So, what were our challenges? Sourcing the right opportunities can be time-consuming and leads to a lot of dead ends. Even if the opportunities seem to tick all the boxes as far as activity type, location, transport, there's still the big hurdle of getting introduced to the right person. This is the person that has the authority to make the decision on whether the club will get involved with this project or not. If this person is not open to the concept of the project, they can form a barrier, and the rest of the members may never even hear about it. The door can be closed very quickly. If a person is taking part in a structured class like yoga or drawing, class time is not the time to socialize. So from an inclusion point of view, class members could come and go for months without ever having an interaction with another person. This doesn't mean that structured classes don't work though, because we found that arriving 10 minutes early helps overcome this barrier. This is the time when people attending a class tend to do their socializing, more so than the end when they're rushing off. Social skills are really important, small things even. For example, not knowing how to make small talk or leaving a bathroom untidy for the next person can be a challenge, and this can cause a barrier. So being armed in advance with a few basics can really help. Some families were concerned about a mentor instead of care staff being the supporting role. Most families were supportive, but some staff and family members found it difficult to step back. We need to talk about barriers to joining clubs or becoming a volunteer. 5 clubs refused a person with an intellectual disability joining the club. Some care organisations, like nursing homes, had stopped using volunteers during COVID, and they haven't picked back up yet. Some gave the reason to refuse as insurance. Others didn't like the red tape, like the Garda check, the research consent paperwork. It was off-putting for some. There was a preconception about people identified with care as not eligible to be a volunteer. Some expected that a care staff member would always accompany the person. So despite these refusals, 1 of the 5 said they were interested, but the timing was just not right. And we will go back to this club in the future. When setting up anything new, there's always going to be hitches. There was a range of challenges around communication, from crossed wires about when transport would arrive, to sometimes the mentor not fully understanding what a person was saying to them. Some mentors provided support that the person didn't need, and I was able to guide them. There was lots of individual concerns, so I kept in touch regularly with everyone, and these hitches were all problems with solutions. As this was new, some care staff had concerns about handing over responsibility, and they needed reassurance about their duty of care. Now, I'd like to show you a video in which Jeff talks about his experience of becoming a volunteer for 1 hour a week as a stable hand in Copper Beach Stables, Kildare. You'll also hear from Louise, who's the owner, and Alana, who's Jeff's mentor.
Louise from Copper Beach Stables. Louise, would you like to tell us a bit about why you agreed to get involved with this project?
Well, we were riding school there about 8 years ago. We opened the riding school. We did lessons for everyone. I think everyone's inclusive with animals. Animals are great with the people. And so we did lessons for children then with additional needs. And then the way things went, we had to close the riding school. It just got too busy and life. And so then when COVID came along, we opened the riding school again, but just specifically for people or children with additional needs. And so then when you contacted us about Jeff, this is what we do. We just include everybody. And Jeff's just been coming here on a weekly basis just to help Alana, and he's been a great help. Alana coaches him, and like everybody loves animals and gets on well with animals, so it's a no-brainer really. Yeah,
so it's worked well for you.
It's been great, yeah, and Jeff seems to love it. Alana's great, she teaches him, and I just think animals bring out the best in people. If they love them, you can just do it, and that's that. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a million.
No problem. Thanks. Sorry.
She's doing relatively well, Joe. I mean, we've had a lot of challenges. Kira.
What's your hands?
Oh, I will. So, Jeff, you've been volunteering here at Copper Beach Stables. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
My name's Jeffrey.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this. And now I'm looking here now.
Yeah. Do you live near here?
That's because I live with my sister-in-law, Linda.
Okay.
Where my brother's saying.
Yeah.
And my brother's saying was big in horses.
Oh, your brother. So that's where you get your love of horses as well, is it?
And something like that, yes,
Yeah.
Lindy.
And what made you want to do this?
That is something I like to bring up.
Yeah.
Does I want to work here.
You'd like to work somewhere like this, would you?
Something like this, yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm better because I'm a people person.
Okay.
Does I like it there.
What's good about this kind of work?
I like to be outside. Fresh air in my lungs.
Yeah.
Meet a lot of different people I never met before.
Yeah, yeah.
And then after, if I have something, a piece of paper, I'll be fine.
And has it been a good experience for you?
It was an excellent experience.
Yeah. Well, what was your first day like when you came?
Oh, nervous.
Yeah, you were nervous.
Really.
Why? Why were you nervous, do you think?
Yeah, well, about that now. Maybe it's be something I didn't know, something I never learned yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe this be my first time doing this.
Okay, so it was nerve-wracking. And when you came in first, you met Alana. What was that like?
Lana was a lovely, lovely person.
Yeah.
All took me on.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a lot of people wanted to go Air Force. Dad, I thought Air Force.
And what kind of jobs did she ask you to do?
One did that sleigh.
Yeah.
And take out horses.
Okay, you lead them out, do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have to break some stones.
Yeah.
I have to do a lot more things I never done before. Something I never learned.
Yeah.
Yet.
And was that hard learning new things?
It is, yeah, it is, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and what about meeting new people? Have you met many new people since you came?
I met a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I am somebody's assistant.
Okay. And are you usually on your own working here, or do you work with other people?
Oh, I work with different people.
Yeah, yeah.
Ones I never met before.
Yeah.
And now I'm working here. Now I like to adopt here.
You'd like a job, so that's your goal, is to work somewhere like this?
Yes, somewhere like this, yeah.
Now you have experience.
Yes, now I'm happy what I'm doing, and I really don't want to leave here.
Okay, oh, that's really good. I'm sure they're glad to hear that. So you finished your 4 months on the project, say. So what's your plan now?
Now I want to get a job.
Okay, that's the next goal.
That's been my next goal. I want to go after next.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Jeff, thanks a million for chatting with us today, and best of luck going forward. Hi, this is Alana. Alana, could you tell us a bit about yourself and what your role is here?
I'm the head lass here on the yard, and I solely work with children with additional needs.
Okay, and you acted as mentor to Jeff for the last 4 months. What was that like?
Oh, it was such an amazing experience. I do hope that Jeff will stay on with us afterwards. It was so rewarding just to see him kind of flourish and go from not really knowing what he was doing to just having the run of the place, really. He has his own assistant now, so I'm absolutely delighted.
And so he came in the way, he had no staff from care with him, he didn't have support staff. You were the person who supported him. How was that different, do you think, than if care staff had have come with him?
I feel like it was 10 times better, because realistically, like, it gave him a little bit more independence, you know. I feel like it might have been a bit more of a hindrance than a help if care staff came with him. He might have been dependent more on them to do a little bit more, and he just seemed to really fit in here. And I think he just thought of himself as another member of staff, which is exactly how we treated him as well. So I do think it was more independence for him and less of a kind of babysitting, you know, memento without them being here.
Yeah, and was he well able to do the work here, the same as any other staff?
Yeah, like for the first couple of weeks it was a bit touch and go with him. He got a little bit confused and a little bit flustered, but as the weeks went on he just fit right in with everyone, and he got on so well with everyone. Everyone knows him around the place now, and he's just like part of the furniture at this stage.
So socially it's been good?
It has indeed.
And what about for the other staff that work here? Have they got on well with Jeff?
At the beginning there was slight communication issues, but again, after that, after I'd say the first 3 weeks, no issues, and we always looked forward to Wednesday for Jeff coming in.
And so did people have to change their communication style, or just?
Yeah, a little bit, I suppose. You know, obviously we're very much get up and go kind of people. You expect work to be done like that, you know, whereas with Jeff he did take a little bit more time to understand, you know, where different parts of the yard was, the muck heap, the hay shed, wheelbarrows. So it wasn't a case of just saying, okay, go and get that wheelbarrow. You know, you had to show him where things were, and, you know, take it slow with him, you know.
Yeah. But then once he knew.
Oh yeah, he knows where everything is now.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is my second year.
Oh yeah, and he's hoping to stay on and volunteer a little bit longer.
Oh, I hope so. Are you going to stay with me?
Well, if I'm going to work, yes.
Good. Brilliant. I'm delighted to hear that, Jeff.
I'm looking for a job.
Yeah, that's it. Full-time employment for you, Jeff. You can be my assistant manager.
I like that word.
I say you do.
Look, thanks a million, Alana. It's been so good. The experience for Jeff has been brilliant.
Oh, it's great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for all your help as well. We'd be lost without you. Good man.
Thanks to Alana and Louise and Jeff for letting us come here today and do the video. We've had a great afternoon. So as you can see, Jeff had a positive experience, and his volunteer role has helped him now focus on 2 different types of work that he might do. However, for people who've retired from work or who don't choose to work, having an opportunity to become a volunteer without it leading to a job is also important. It's the contribution for some that matters more than the paycheck, particularly people in the older age groups. For others, the flexibility of becoming a volunteer also suits. And I think that we can see from Jeff's experience that it has great benefits in making new connections where you live. I want to come back now to other challenges that we faced. Research tells us that having a flexible transport that's individualised is an international challenge. For us, there was a problem of no guaranteed weekend or evening transport for people who live with their family. Some family members were not available to provide transport. Sometimes transport was late or unreliable. Care buses in local day services are needed for morning and afternoon bus runs. and there were difficult choices to make between planned group leisure activity or one individual's social role transport need. In Irish services, some staff use their personal cars, and I came across issues to do with building up extra hours and mileage. But on a positive note, we had 2 arrangements where family dropped the person off and care staff and transport picked the person up. So I want to tell you about Frank's story because we learned a good deal from him. He lives with his family in a rural village and has limited transport. When I met him, he said he was bored at weekends. He wanted to become a weekend volunteer somewhere like a nursing home. I searched, but it just didn't exist in his village, which was what he really wanted. Finding it outside his village meant that we'd come across the barrier of transport at weekends. I couldn't find him a mentor within the limited time available in this project. But over the next few months, his key worker helped Frank to broaden his range of interests. He now has joined a midweek morning class, 15 kilometres from his home in the town where his care day service is located. So he still has something new in his life, but he still has the problem of no transport and being bored and isolated at weekends in his home. Finally, I want to talk to you about Garda vetting or police checks for mentors. We found it had pros and cons. The pros, of course, relate to safeguarding and highlighting possible concerns in advance. In Ireland, Garda vetting is standard practice for volunteers working with children and vulnerable adults. The cons are mainly to do with how long it takes. Sometimes I was ready to go and do introductions, but I had to postpone due to delays in hearing back about the Garda check. For the potential mentor, it makes the process seem more official. And as I mentioned earlier, it was off-putting for some clubs. Our intention is that the person with the disability joins the club as an equal member. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we gaining and what are we losing by including Garda vetting? I'm going to hand you over now to Geraldine, who will talk about implications for practice from this research study.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So as part of looking at implications for practice, we asked ourselves, what might we do differently? The Australian study that we drew some of our design from used the term mentor, and we adopted that term. But we think that the word mentor sounds more like a workplace. The volunteering opportunities that we're recommending, it's not a work experience that might lead to a job. It's volunteering as a valued social role that has benefits in becoming known where you live, forming acquaintances, and some of those might lead to friendships. We suggested if you're thinking about taking on this type of project, we suggest you'd come up with another word. Here are some, that are on our list of, possible terms. So for example there, connecting locally volunteer, that describes a little more closely what we want that club member or the volunteer in the organization to do. It's not a friend. It is someone, though, who makes introductions and helps a person to get involved and meet new people. So one of the implications for practice is that some service models have unintended barriers to individuals making connections locally. We tested an individualized model, and one of the implications is to consider what is the impact of segregated group leisure activities on social inclusion? Yes, the group is present in the local area, in the leisure facility, with their staff. However, the international literature tells us that they're identified by local people with the service provider. And they're identified with the service provider more than as individuals. One researcher described it as a group of tourists out with their tour guides visiting an area. Studies in the Netherlands identified that the group is seen by locals as a closed group, and the perception may be of clients under supervision. You can see this closed group as a bubble there in figure C. Now, some leisure clubs that Anne-Marie approached said they were familiar with what they called the Care lads. They had groups from Care attending the club on a specific day. And what we wanted, though, was to focus on the individual, making new connections in their own right, in their home neighbourhood. We recommend that service providers have a single overall management strategy for sourcing new opportunities for both volunteering and for people with disability who want to choose employment. And, you know, maybe people might have a job and a volunteering role. We also recommend staff education on social inclusion, in particular do's and don'ts, you know, for staff helping people to form acquaintances, new acquaintances. We also recommend skills training for frontline service leaders in sourcing, matching, and maintaining roles. We recommend volunteer sampling. And so for the over 35s who are retired or not choosing work, we recommend that service providers would open up a broad range of volunteer opportunities. Our design was to start with the person's personal goals. But some people didn't have volunteer experience, therefore they didn't know perhaps what they might like or not like. And so we recommend that service providers have a specialist job for a leader who would seek out a range of volunteer opportunities, both short and long term. And then individuals could sample more than one. They might decide the volunteering isn't for them, or they might find something that actually added significantly to their quality of life. We also recommend education for service users and families on the benefits of volunteering and the link to health and well-being, as well as becoming known locally. Also, we've come up with a valued social roles checklist that leads to forming new acquaintances. Now, it's definitely an individual, not a group model. This is based on our own studies and a review of the literature. Our research finds that some social roles are better than others at supporting people to form new acquaintances. The role needs to be visible and as close to home as possible. There needs to be a definite contribution that you can point to, something that's valued locally. No tokenism or special treatment. Instead, find a shared, common, practical activity or a task. Within that, there'll be better results in terms of becoming known if there's regular opportunities to socialise with other volunteers or other club members. For example, in the photo you see here, this is a local tidy up local group. It picks litter from the area. And if they, for example, have a cup of coffee afterwards for all volunteers in a local cafe, well, then that leads to more opportunities. Now, Australian studies have identified that the best social roles are non-competitive in a club or an organisation that, you know, doesn't have a lot of rules. Also, groups or organisations where being different and diversity are welcome. Some groups in our study had welcoming diversity in their information about the club. Suzanne Guerin and I completed a national survey of Irish service providers in 2019, and 2/3 of Irish service providers did not have a specific policy on social inclusion. We recommend that all services have a comprehensive policy on social inclusion that clarifies the service objectives for individuals. Put simply, the aim is to support each person to strengthen and maintain existing connections and to make new acquaintances in your local area. Here's a list of references related to this presentation for those of you who like to do some follow-up reading. And here are some people then that Anne-Marie and I would like to thank, especially the individuals and their mentors who took part. We're also very grateful to care staff and family members for supporting individuals to get involved. And thank you too for your interest in this topic. Hello again. I can see there's a lot of interest in this particular presentation. And we'll have plenty of questions and comments to go through, but most notably, I think a lot of very positive wishes for Jeff on his journey through volunteering, and great compliments on that. So thanks again, Jeff. So now, perhaps we're all now back on screen. So Eileen, over to you for any questions that have come through there.
Hi, Geraldine. Congratulations, everybody. You're getting some great feedback, and we'll be able to see all those when we're finished. Everybody can look back who's been involved. Jeff, in particular, your video, I think you seem to be a bit of a superstar now. Everybody's really enjoyed that. Well, just in terms of questions, Jeff, maybe we'll start with you. Do you have any more advice for people if they want to start volunteering and they've never been and they're worried? What advice would you give to somebody starting? Can you hear me okay, Jeff?
Eileen, if you could just move the mic a bit closer to your mouth, that would help.
Oh yeah, sorry,
great.
Jeff. Did you hear that question? Have you got any advice for people who might like to do volunteering and they're nervous? What would you say?
Yes. What would you say? Try it out. Be yourself and work harder. And
Be
then out with all people and like your bosses.
Be yourself. And what was that other thing you said there? Work hard.
Yes. Work hard. Get on with your bosses and your assistants and work hard and earn all your own.
Get on with people. So your advice is, don't worry about it. Work hard. Get on with it.
And listen to the people and your bosses.
It's very important, isn't it, how you get on with people? That's one of the main things I would think as well, Jeff, isn't it? Getting on with people is the main thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And I know when you and I were talking before, you said that getting a job, it can help getting a job then maybe as well. The volunteering can help, do you think?
I say yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jeff. People really enjoyed your video. So I have another question then, maybe Anne-Marie or Geraldine might have a think about this one. So if people have problems being understood or with their communication, what might help with that? So some people are wondering how you would help a person themselves, and other people are wondering, is there anything that for the mentor or the business could be done to help them make the experience, more accessible for someone who has some communication difficulties?
Well, yeah, I can come in there. I suppose what we're looking at here is trying to make activities and volunteering roles that people aren't relying too much on conversation. So that's not the main thing. It's more, people are doing things together. And when you are doing the same task together, you're talking about the same things. So kind of the conversation, it's more obvious what somebody's talking about when you're both working on the same task at the same time. But the emphasis is not on really conversation, and the pressure isn't there a lot of the time.
That sounds really, really good example.
May I add to that, just to give a couple of examples? Like in the earlier, when we asked people, what do you do to meet new people? There were two examples many examples, but one was get involved in a recycling project locally. Another one was obviously walking, we've mentioned that, but also social farming. And if you haven't heard about social farming in Ireland, I would strongly suggest you look up their website, because again, like Anne-Marie said, if there's a shared activity and if it's practical, And if I'm doing that alongside you, then conversation is less important than enjoying doing that shared activity together. And that's one of the things on our checklist that we've developed. And we're happy to share that checklist later on. I'll put it in the chat how you get that. So great question on communication. Also, Anne-Marie covered in her presentation that we had individual education for each mentor. And Anne-Marie was the person who did that. And one of our reflections is that we would actually add in a section on communication into that individual education for the local connectors. Yeah.
Very good. I'm just seeing if I missed any new questions coming in there. So another question came up about duty of care and risks. So this can be something if you're working in services. I think some of the people tuning in today are wondering, Anne-Marie and Geraldine, how that can be addressed or balanced, you know, who holds a duty of care when people are out doing volunteering, if there's a service involved and a mentor separate, how those things are kind of ironed out, because obviously most of the time things go well, but then sometimes there might be something might go wrong for somebody, or they mightn't be that happy in the job. How is that kind of shared or worked out?
Yeah, there was. I mean, there was a bit of concern with staff about duty of care, you know, because staff do feel responsible. You know, if they're supposed to be working with a person and they're introducing them to a volunteer that's not a staff member of care. I suppose their concern is if something happens, who does this fall on? You know, does this come back to me? Or, you know, it's about setting the foundations in place, right? I mean, we do a number of meetings with our mentors before ever introducing them to service users. We make sure that they've done a consent process so they know exactly what they're getting involved with. They've done the sit down and done a bit of education with us. They've every opportunity to talk about concerns. We've also done the Garda vetting, which obviously we've talked about has its pros and cons, but it also covers us as well for duty of care. And I mean, if there's a real concern around you know, protecting a service user when they're out, we would recommend risk assessing what they're doing. And if you do a risk assessment and it's coming up that this is, you know, that the risk is okay, then I think you've covered all your bases at that stage. I mean, just to say, if then it happens, if you do a risk assessment and obviously you're not entirely comfortable, then you just look at doing it in a different way. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means you need to do things differently.
Modify the tasks in some way, or the support.
Modify the tasks or the support, exactly, yeah. You know, yeah.
Okay. Just one last question, just going back to the communication thing again, because a lot of this research is happening in a locality, you know, in the Kildare area or whatever. I'm wondering if there's any outshoots that have been thought about for like working on communication accessibility more locally, like as a general community project, you know, outside of individual relationships.
Yes, I think one of our conclusions from this project and also from the Map My Area project is that we need to continuously, as I think as service providers, we would recommend that you consider continuously being involved in public education. However, you know, it is that you see that it's best to do that. It can be simple things, and I've seen a lot of local media where, you know, people are featured for their achievements and they're featured locally in local media. I did mention in my earlier presentation that we do recommend public education, particularly for people with intellectual disability and autism. And if people have a visual difference of some kind, or they maybe communicate through vocalizations, maybe communicate in ways that need to be understood, that public education is necessary to support those individuals to take their place equally where they live. So I think that kind of public education is pretty is really important. And it could be done in, like in Ireland, we have some very strong national advocacy groups like Inclusion Ireland and As I Am. You know, there could be partnerships forged where national advocacy organisations lend their expertise to those local campaigns.
And I'm aware that in St. Michael's House, where I do some work, that the speech therapist there recently did a study with the shopping centre, Dundrum in that case, where they did some training with the staff on communication and best practice when you're working with anybody, which kind of works for people with intellectual disability, but also other kind of any difficulty really where you need somebody to slow down and speak in a different way to you. So I'll try and get a resource for that for your website, Geraldine. I know you're launching a new website.
That would be super. And I see actually, while we're on duty of care and Garda clearance, I see a question there from Adrian saying, do you need a Garda clearance for all volunteers working with the person, for example, all volunteers in Copper Beach Stables, or just for the mentor or local connector? And the answer to that is we in care, we made a decision to seek the Garda check for the mentor, for the person who's going to be the primary person connecting in with the individual.
Yeah, that's right. That's great to get that answered. And the library staff, just to mention that there's training there done for library staff as well, and something called JAM training. So JAM,
yeah, tune into our second webinar and you'll hear all about JAM and how we tested that out in Newbridge. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then just a final comment there about the Special Olympics. Yeah, just remembering, I suppose, if people remembered the wonderful time we had when the Special Olympics were hosted here, just trying to, again, share this research widely and get the positivity that was there around welcoming people with intellectual disability into society to kind of I think to sort of re-excite that this kind of research is great if we can spread the word.
Indeed. I'm conscious, Eileen, we parked the transport, use my pun, but we parked the transport question earlier, and I would like to come back to
reverse back to that now.
We need to, because it can be a prominent barrier. So the kind of questions I think from memory people were asking is, you know, how do we overcome barriers to transport in rural Ireland? Another question was, is transport accessible, public transport, and what do we need to do there? Can I ask, you know, or maybe ask Anne-Marie to comment on transport, you know, because, and how that featured as an issue in this project, and any recommendations you might have.
Yeah, no, transport, it's a huge issue. You know, anyone working in services with people with disabilities will know. As far as for socializing for people with disabilities, it's a big problem because, you know, most of us do our socializing in the evenings and in weekends. That's kind of the time where most clubs are open, and classes, hobbies, sports, you know, everything's even on weekends. Services, obviously, you know, you can only offer so much transport during daytime hours, local service hours. This is not really when people are out socializing. So it's the evenings and weekends, and then people are relying on maybe elderly parents or a family that only has one car and there's other brothers and sisters. And a lot of public transport it's just not reliable. Anybody who's listening, who's in cities or, you know, in other parts of the world, or in Ireland, in Dublin or Cork or places, you know, maybe the public transport is quite good, but certainly outside these areas, it's not good. There are buses, there are trains, but they're unreliable, and a lot of the time they're not accessible, or you have to ring ahead, or wait for the bus that's accessible to come along, because not all of them are accessible. And there's not proper covering on bus. I could go on and on. It's a big problem. So there's a big barrier to when people want to socialize, when the opportunities are there, and then this massive barrier of transport to get into those. And it's hard to know the solution at this stage, but I do know that services like CARE and other organisations are prioritising this issue.
In fact, CARE has a number of key strategy groups working on particular strands of quality of life. And they have, at CARE, have helpfully identified and have a whole strategic group working on the issue of transport. And I'm an admirer of that, and I'd recommend it to other service providers. And also, we need to say that for many people that I met, half of the people actually had the transport they needed. So we are getting it right too. You know, so some people had all of the flexible transport that they needed, but for others, particularly if you're trying to start something new in your life, or you want to try out something new, and you need to be accompanied, and you need transport, then that is typically challenging, and that's the thing that all service providers need to address. And I can reassure you, it's an international issue as well. Okay.
Somebody mentioning here the importance of taxis, a good relationship with your taxi drivers can help with this. And I know somewhere further up the line, some people were saying there are some local pockets of good practice, you know, where there's local bus routes, and not just for people with disabilities, but anybody who might need it to get in from their rural areas into their local towns and that. So I think that's most of the questions answered. There was one, Anne-Marie, but I think it was linked there with your transport. Just the general issue of funding for staff to work, you know, evenings and weekends, that can be a barrier, but I'm sure you probably agree that is a problem.
That is a problem. Yeah,
You know, have a magic bullet for that one.
No, you know, because obviously there's staff that are working in day services, and their day service hours, and then there's staff that are working, you know, in different areas, and people have their different responsibilities, and you know, it's just not always possible to give one person the time of one staff member for to go to their social activity. That's just like realistic at the moment. It's not always possible, but sometimes it is.
So I suppose that's where the supplementary goodwill and effort and time of mentors and people that comes in, doesn't it? Or siblings or other people that might be in the person's life to try and.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd hope that like the mentor is not volunteering their time forever and ever and ever. The idea is that the mentor just does the introductory few months in a hope that other natural supports will come into place. You know, that maybe when brothers and sisters see how important it is, and we have had experience of this in this project, where they've seen how much it's meant to them, then during the closure of local service, the family provided transport because they could see, well, this is important to get that person there. You know, so in the time period the mentor's there, other supports can kind of fall into place.
Jeff, I wonder, because we're going to finish the question and answer it now in a minute, have you any last words that you want to say to the group?
Not that much. I've done a lot of rest for now.
Okay.
Thank you very much again for sharing your video. It's the highlight of today. Thank you.
I agree. It is the highlight.
Geraldine, I'll pass back to you to wrap up now.
Thanks so much. Okay, now I want to remind you about some important things. We have a second webinar on Wednesday, May the 10th, and it's about how we recognise and overcome barriers to accessibility. And we'll have 5 self-advocates who will tell you about themselves, about how they became co-researchers in their own town. And we'll tell you about what was covered on their self-advocacy course and how they went about answering the question, how accessible is our town? How do we get over barriers to accessibility? If you're somebody who likes watching videos as a way of learning, we'll have a lot more of those actually next time round. Now, you need to book for this webinar separately. So if you haven't already booked for the webinar, if you just booked once, then you need to book a second time for webinar 2. And I might ask, actually, I have the link here and I'll put it in the chat in a moment. Or Ali, if you have the link, perhaps you might put that in the chat now. If you can't make it on May the 10th, we suggest that you register anyway, and then afterwards you'll get the link to the recording, which you can then watch in your own time. I mentioned earlier about the two there's downloadable documents from today's webinar. And what I'm going to do now, definitely myself, is put that link into the chat. So let me just figure out that now in a moment. And let's see the chat. Okay, give me a second. And it's to everyone. And paste. Okay, so this will give you a guide to a newly launched website, which is very much in its early stages. But you'll remember there was the definition of social inclusion. That's there on that page, and you can download the document. And also the checklist for social roles, because social roles really are a key plank in promoting social inclusion. Some roles are better than others, as we've said, and that checklist would be helpful to anybody who wishes to pursue that further. Then on there have been a number of questions in the chat about free resources or other resources. And I mentioned the social inclusion course that is being run by Christine Bigby and colleagues in Melbourne, Australia. It's a very good course. It's free of charge and can be done online. And here is the link to that now, if you would like to copy that. And then finally, some people were asking, well, are there other resources, you know, that we could use in person-centered planning? And again, on the Connecting Locally website, it's connectinglocally.ie, you'll see links to other websites that we have certainly used and have you know, through literature review, I've come across that I think you'll find very, very helpful. So now I want to thank all the panel today, in particular Eileen, Jeff, and Anne-Marie. Thanks to Ali for all your work behind the scenes, and a big thank you to everyone in CARE for all your support for these research studies. Now, we'll all say goodbye until the second webinar on the 10th of May, and look forward to seeing you there. And shortly now, Ali is going to play a short, very short, 1 minute, 2 minute closing address from Michael Hurley, who's the Access Officer in Kildare County Council. So bye everyone, take care, and
Thanks,
handing over back to Ali now for Michael Hurley's closing address.
My name is Michael Hurley and I am the Access Officer for Kildare County Council. I would like to begin by commending CARE and the UCD Centre for Disability Studies on this excellent piece of research. What was presented this morning was very insightful and informative. We in Kildare County Council admire CARE's excellent work over the past 55 years in supporting people with disabilities to be treated as equal citizens in County Kildare. And we are delighted to partner with CARE on these research studies and look forward to working with them into the future. As you are aware, this excellent piece of research would not have been possible without the support and effort of a large number of people. I would like to begin by thanking the Minister for State for Disability and her department for making the funding available for this important research. Thank you to Katie Burke and Paula Mara, the CARE Operations Managers on the Steering Committee. May I also thank Dr. Geraldine Boland from the UCD Centre for Disability Studies for her guidance and expertise throughout all stages of this project. Another key person is Anne-Marie Potter from CARE. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Your work on this research has really made a difference. Thanks also to Ali Warner, who was the IT coordinator of today's webinar. I particularly want to thank the people with intellectual disabilities who generously gave their time to this research. You are the experts in what it is like to live with an intellectual disability, and your input has been vital. Finally, I want to thank you for coming to the webinar from wherever you joined in the world today. We hope that what we have learned here in County Kildare will help you to make important changes for people with intellectual disabilities that you support. The research that you've heard about today is a big step forward in identifying some of the barriers that people with intellectual disability face in being treated equally in their local communities. We all now share a responsibility to remove those barriers. Thanks again for your cooperation and participation.